Find it, I can bring it up too.
Nightmare.
Should be one of the first posts.
Alrighty. Did you put it on our front page?
I had to send it to quite a few people.
It'll go to YouTube.
It's not on the front of our calendar, that's the problem.
You have to scroll. To the date.
That's the problem.
Jeff, when you golf around here, where do you golf?
That was,
Are you remember? Yeah.
he tries to hit my house.
All the time. Are you right on the edge somewhere?
It's an accident.
I'm a block in, so it's a challenge. All my neighbors love that he tries to hit my house.
Unfortunately, I might hit it once in a while.
So I'm gonna go to Selkirk Fire District because theirs is probably easier to find than ours. So where'd you put it here?
Or Facebook, I'm sorry.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah,
Selkirk, is it Selkirk Fire?
Yeah, I can bring it up.
That was mean.
like a box of chocolates.
Made it in what way?
You never know what you're gonna get. I bet if the momentum for weekly meetings
This is
was
right here.
going, it just.
Copy it and text it to you.
Well,
Oh, you got it.
Which one?
So click on that. Click on the page itself.
Can you see I don't use Facebook?
That's okay. And then go, it's the second. There you go. And then it's in this body right here. So hit see more. There you go. And then there's the link.
This weekend, Jeff wrote. Oh, it was terrible. Yeah, what was the deal? Just icy roads or what? Or like slushy roads or something? I've been cold.
Decided to brave the bridge, Tammy?
Really, sort of right.
Great. You don't like the bridge?
Oh, no, just this time of morning.
Jeff.
So,
Jeff. What's the deal?
How far south do you live?
Hit head on northbound.
All right, are we ready? All right, it is 8 o'clock and we are here for a chat with our Chief Armstrong. So part of the reason we're doing this chat is to have a conversation with our fire chief to kind of understand what the needs are in Bonner County. So I did receive some specific questions from members of the public, but I also want to give the opportunity for Chief Armstrong to give an introduction of all of the area that he serves and kind of the state of fire and some of the concerns that he has seen. One of the things that Bonner County has benefited from is a lot of EMS chiefs and fire chiefs reached out to the county when we had our initial issues with what's the direction of Bonner County EMS, and Chief Armstrong was one of those persons. So I want to turn it over to Chief Armstrong to give us an introduction, and then to go through some questions that members of the community have about the state of fire in Bonner County.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. Yeah, I wish that we were under different conditions when we started building this relationship. Most people know that I'm fairly new to the role of fire chief. One of the things that I've noticed, not only in making my presentation with EMS, but also just in visits around the community, having community meetings, holding coffee with the fire chief, is that a lot of people don't fully understand what stations are staffed, what stations aren't, what is Selkirk, what is Westside versus Sagal. And so I really wanted to kind of circle back and kind of visit that so people understood what their fire districts were, who their fire districts were, and most importantly, who their fire chief is. And also kind of wanted to explain the Northside relationship and how I ended up being the contract fire chief for Northside. So take a few minutes. I want to leave plenty of time for questions, but I'll jump into some brief introduction. We'll answer questions if we still have time. Maybe I can circle back to some of my bullet points that I wanted to kind of cover today with regard to stations, response times, volunteer coverage. So just briefly about me, I came here in 2023, initially was going to be the Deputy Chief of Operations for Selkirk. Later in my journey with Selkirk, the city of Sandpoint and the districts decided to part ways. As a result of that, I helped the districts form the successor JPA. At the same time, I was helping Northside with a vacancy they had. Their fire chief had retired. And so I had stepped in temporarily to kind of help them continue with some leadership, but ultimately the goal was to recruit a fire chief for them and help them with that process. As things worked out, I ended up being asked by the districts to lead the new successor JPA, so the fire chief for Westside and Sagal fire districts. And at the same time, the leadership of Northside, the fire commissioners, I think, saw a vision and saw what a shared fire chief was doing to benefit Northside. Specifically, it allowed them to hire an additional firefighter because of the cost savings. And, the way it used to be is there used to be 4 fire chiefs here within a couple square miles of each other, right? And they bump into each other all day long and decide where to go for lunch, right? So I think we realized that there was some cost savings to streamline at the top and create kind of one vision for the fire districts.
Can you explain what a JPA is? Because a lot of people use that term, but they don't actually understand what a JPA is. And I'm going to look at my phone only because people are texting me about the Zoom link.
No problem. So Joint Powers Agreement allows government entities to come together and operate as one. There has to be very strict guidelines with regard to budget, sharing of resources. Each district has to pay for their own level of service. They have to pay for their own expectations for the community. Level of service is probably all I needed to say there. So what that does is that allows us to, if a fire engine breaks down on West Side, allows us to pick up a fire engine in Sagal and move it over there. Allows us to experience some cost savings with insurance, workers' comp, shared fire chief, shared administration, and then ultimately, operationally, we're one unit. So operationally, you see the benefits of that on a fire. So that's really what has occurred. It's not a merger. It's not a fire authority. Both entities remain separate legal entities, and at any point in time, they can withdraw from the JPA if they want. And that's why I think that's actually a very ideal model for Idaho, specifically after meeting with people, talking to them about countywide fire departments, talking to them about what does it look like in the future, where are we at in 10 years, where are we at in 20 years. The JPA model makes people feel comfortable because they still have that local control. They still have the fire commissioners that they can go and talk to, but we're experiencing all the benefits of a larger, more agile organization. I equate it, not to pick on EMS, but thanks to Chief Lindsay for being here. I equate it back to the limited knowledge that I have 20 years ago of the individual little ambulances running around Bonner County, right? Probably not a lot of coordination, probably not the greatest scenes when you had an MCI, probably not a lot of shared vision as far as what somebody wanted, the Sandpoint ambulance versus the Sagal ambulance. And really, let's be honest, egos got in the way. Potentially there was some turf wars, right? You get rid of that when you start coming together and breaking down the silos. So it's not about regionalization. It's not about big government. It's just about breaking down the silos and then ultimately delivering a better level of service, cost savings.
Okay. So I have some questions for you from members of the public. One of them is the comment about defensible space. What is the impact that you see, and Bonner County is identified as a fire county? Mm-hmm. And so what are the values of the community understanding what defensible space is to kind of overall help the landscape that is fire in our area? And what is the definition in your mind as you have been to multiple fires around?
Right.
What is the distance and what does that look like and what service does your department offer?
So we've just been talking recently, I'll start with the service. We've just been talking recently because we've had a couple requests for staff members to come out and actually visit people at their homes and do an assessment. Mm-hmm. We're happy to do that. Disclaimer, if we get 100 people to call tomorrow and want it, there's going to be some lag time, there's going to be some delay. So as we are available, we actually have some staff members that are highly trained and qualified in that realm where they can actually come out and give you recommendations. It's not an enforcement thing. We're not going to write it up. We're not reporting it at the county, but we certainly want to see people take advantage of defensible space. It doesn't mean cutting down trees. I know we talked before and you said, well, people don't want to cut down the trees. It doesn't have to be that. Let us come out. Let's have conversations with you. Let us show you some tips. It's all about ladder fuels. It's all about removing the brush. It's all about keeping the grass from starting the brush from getting into the trees. And there's a lot of stuff you can do, even limbing up trees, but keeping those trees around your home. There's guidelines out there. NFPA, which is a National Fire Protection Association, they have recommendations. Obviously, IDL has some different recommendations. At the foundation, they're all the same. But the recommendations from IDL are more specific to our fuel type, more specific to our area, which I think is great to look at. Bonner County EMS, or I'm sorry, Bonner County, yeah, EMS. You guys have some. Emergency management, too many acronyms. Emergency management has some material that they pushed out there as well. One of the things I noticed back when I was a deputy chief is I said, where's our education program? You've got, again, people working in silos, right? Well, IDL has this. Well, Bonner County Emergency Management has this. Well, National Fire Protection Association has this, and Sagal District's always told people this, and it's everybody working in these silos. And I said, we need to come together and have one unified message. The solution to that, I do believe, is Firewise. And we can talk about that probably for hours, but
Yeah.
I do believe is getting together and having that conversation. To finish out, I will say defensible space makes a difference, especially if we're pulling up your driveway and making the decision if we're going to stay there and we're going to protect your home, or if we're going to take action to protect your home and then leave before the fire front hits. Defensible space, along with hardening of your structure, hardening of your home, is what will make a difference. Homes don't burn down when the fire front blows through. Homes burn down from a small ember happening later. So you'll see the fire front go through, you'll see all these what we call matchsticks, which are burnt trees, and then 10, 15 minutes later, here's a house. So I could go on and on about the importance of this, and I will finish out with, I've been in the fire service for a little over 25 years, and fires did not burn the way they burn now. They burned before. And I'm not going to get to the cause of that, and I don't want to make it political by any means, but fires are burning differently. We used to be able to go direct. We used to be able to catch these things small, less than an acre. It's just not happening anymore.
Okay. Do you have another bullet point that you have that you want to cover, or do you want me to ask you another question?
Let's go with your questions. I want to make sure the community gets
Nope.
your questions.
And I want to make sure I offer, let me make sure the people that are texting me, okay, Teresa's up there. I want to make sure that the members of the public also get, so if you guys have a question, raise your hand and jump in, because that's the point of this conversation. And so when you look at the landscape that is Bonner County, where do you see that there's gaps in your area, or of what service that you can provide? And it's a conversation that we have even with our ambulance district of, do we have gaps in coverage? Where do we see the growth, not just today, but in the years to come, so that the community can be prepared for that? And so what's your opinion on the growth and the need that you see in the area that you cover?
I have lots of opinions on the growth.
Yes.
Most of my observations, some of them are data influenced. I've looked at some of the data. Most of them are anecdotal, right? Just from my past experience and looking at the community and looking at response times. I haven't had the opportunity to do a deep dive in what I would call scientific, like standard of cover. It starts with the community's expectation. We deliver the level of service that the community expects. If the community expects one fire station in Sandpoint to be staffed, and then we just respond from Sandpoint and we cover all the calls in Bonner County, that's what we would do. Of course, my expectations and my desire for the fire service versus maybe what the community wants versus what the community can afford, maybe that doesn't all line up. But that's my job as the fire chief, is to continue to advocate for better fire department, better fire coverage. Some of the concerns that I have going into the future is, are we going to be able to keep the current level of service? Are we going to be able to keep the Carywood Fire Station staffed? What can we do to potentially put a presence out in the Bay area, Vasic, Sineaquatine, where one of our stations is? We've recently put a resident firefighter out in Bottle Bay. I don't know if you've followed that. I don't know if the community's aware of that or not. That individual being out there has had a direct impact on incidents that we've run out in what I would call the Sagal Peninsula. So what I'm doing is I've got very few chess pieces, and I'm trying to move them around on the board and cover the best I can. Conversations for this summer are potentially our wildland seasonal staff is going to go out to the Bay station. What that does is just provides another presence out there. Are they going to be out there 7 days a week? No, they're not. And if they deploy in a wildland fire, they're going to be gone. But maybe 50% of the time they're going to be out there. That's a better level of coverage than we had before. So I do have concerns. I would be hard pressed to tell you, put a pin on a map and say this is the next priority, because I haven't looked at the data. Our data in the past hasn't been the greatest either. But people move to Idaho expecting a 10, 15, 20-minute response time from the fire department. My job as a fire chief is to say we should probably get there sooner, because if you want us to enter your structure and put the fire out, we're going to need to be there sooner. And so that's my job as the fire chief, is to do that, versus the community to say, well, that comes with a price tag. And so in looking at the area, we're doing the best we can in the West Side District. We have the Renco Fire Station staff, which is the center of their district. My concern is for the community of Dover. Looking at the Sagal Fire District, my first concern would be the bottom end of that district. If we came to a point in time where we weren't able to keep the Carywood Station staffed, we're looking at a 16-minute response time to the bottom of the Sagal Fire District. But of course, that's the highway corridor, so it doesn't mean that somebody who lives in Carywood is any more important than somebody who lives off of Glengarry Bay, where we're going to see a 17, 18-minute response time out to their home. So there are gaps in coverage. I think it needs to be further studied. I could certainly come up with recommendations on where we move our staffing, but I would not want to put those in ink until I did a lot more research.
I think one of the biggest questions I have from the community is, as the county sends out our auto email to fire to say, you know, there's a planned development in this area, what are your thoughts on this? And you have been vocal about our growth and availability of water and what we should be doing as we grow as a county. What should the county be making some adjustment to the way in which we are communicating with emergency services as the Board of Commissioners is receiving files about growth and development? We send out a canned letter that says, do you have an issue? It's not very specific. What's the best way to get the best response from fire? And what's your process when you receive that email from the county on a development? And I know that's a big loaded question.
It is a big loaded
That's something a
question.
lot of the community asks, is how do we get those good responses from fire when we're talking about development, I'll use the district that I live in the Spirit Valley area, MLDs was a big thing, it's minor land division, and you'd see the growth, and then all of a sudden you have a subdivision. But because of the way we asked the question, did we really ask it with anticipation of what that growth was going to be in that area versus just enough to pass something? And so what can we do better as a county when we're asking that question? And then what's your process when you receive that email?
So my process is to take a look at it. So just to be fully transparent, there's some bandwidth issues there for me as well. And there's a learning curve for me on how the county was dealing with these things, right? I became the fire chief last June, and it's not an excuse. It's just that there's been a lot to absorb and understand. I've seen a complete change in the county in the last couple of months. I think with the commission change, I think there's more responsive. I can walk in here and I feel like I can have a conversation and folks are listening, folks are replying to my email. So the big thing is that opening that line of communication. I wish it happened sooner, and I wish it didn't happen over a discussion on EMS. The main reason I wanted to be here today was I got 7 pages of notes on growth.
Yeah.
That's the main reason I wanted to talk, because you've heard me at the last couple meetings. It wasn't to come here to advocate for anything. It wasn't to say, oh, poor us in the fire service. It was to be honest and have an honest conversation with the community. But more importantly, to say the chickens are coming home to roost. And if we don't get ahead of this, we're going to have some issues. So there's a lot going on there, and excuse me as I'm going to kind of shotgun some answers here, but I think the big thing is to look holistically at the county, right? Instead of just saying this project's cool, this project's cool, this project's cool, and I think that's happening right now with the Planning Commission, but it's to take a look at what does this thing look like fully built out. We do that in a smaller scale, subdivisions. We have a subdivision going in the North Side Fire District. Instead of just approving 3 houses and another 3 houses, we stop and we look at the entire subdivision. What is this thing going to look like when it's totally built out? What's the fire water that I need? What's the infrastructure? What's the roads? What's the turnarounds? So my process is when that comes through is I will open it and I will determine what items are going to impact fire, and then I will present comments back. Or sometimes I will ask one of my staff members to go through it, especially in the North Side Fire District. I have 2 people that have a lot of history here, know a lot of things, know about available water, know about challenges with traffic and access. And so oftentimes I'll shoot it to them and say, can you go through this and can you present some comments and feedback? Ultimately, then a fire sign-off comes through the fire district anyway, and that's where I get to either approve or return for comments. I don't like to say deny. I don't want to stop growth, because communities are either growing or dying, and I want us to grow and thrive, but at a rate that we can handle and a rate that we can manage.
When it comes to fire, would it be better if the county developed a more comprehensive style of communication with fire when we're talking about development for our subdivisions, for example? Because in some ways, the county, when you talk about approving 3 and then 3 again and then 3 again in a minor land division type of a situation, members of the community historically have said, we can see that a subdivision is being built, but the planning and zoning and the board of commissioners are approving it in incremental stages versus saying, what are you really looking at? Which is part what you're commenting on is, are you really building a subdivision, but you're not asking me about a subdivision? Would it be better if we asked more specific questions when we're sending that over to you, but also on the county side, instead of just sending fire a canned email request, that we send more specific so that when you're handing it off to someone else to answer that, we're getting an answer back specifically on availability of water or the increased density in that area, so that we're pulling that information into the file itself versus no comment from the agency because you really didn't ask me a substantive comment. Would you guys like to see something different? And would that help your flow, since you might not always be available to answer that comprehensive style of answer because we're only asking a generic question?
So I think what you're describing not only delivers a better level of customer service for the community, but also the developers, right? Let's ask the questions that we might have to ask down the road so there aren't any surprises. So I would support, I don't know exactly what that looks like because I haven't worked in planning, but I would support any discussion, and I would be happy to come in here and meet with anybody from the planning department and build that. A small example of that is I had a gentleman come a couple weeks ago, wanted to build a shop, pole barn on his property. It was vacant property, and the question was, what is your plan for this property? Because if you're building a pole barn, you're going to put your RV here and you're not going to live on the property. I'm fine with the access and I'm fine with the driveway, but if your next phase is a home, an ADU, another home, and subdivide your 10 acres, then let's have a conversation about the road. Because what I don't want to do is have them come in 2 years and say, well, the fire chief was fine with my road when it was a barn. But if it's a residence, then we need to talk about access, slope, width, surface, turnarounds, those types of things. So that's kind of as a very small example of kind of how I look at it and go, what's your full intent for this property? One of the things that I've been a part of in the past, and I don't know how it worked because we're fire districts and county, and I don't, everybody's tired of meetings, and then especially meetings about meetings. But we had what we called a DRC, Development Review Committee, and we would come together every couple weeks and sit down, and everybody would just talk about what is going on. Well, this guy said he's going to build a skyscraper in 10 years. So, all right, well, let's start having a conversation about that, right? What is it really going to happen? Is it not going to happen? There are a lot of things going on in our community. And I know that a lot of people shrug off the Highway 95 project, and I know it's 12 years away or whatever it is, but there's a lot of things that we should be talking about now about that, specifically with land use and projects that we may or may not be approving. One of the things is, and it's not a secret anymore because the U-Haul sign is up, but they're trying to build one of those 3-story U-Haul things in Sagal behind Jitters. And they bought the property and they put up the sign and said coming soon. And so I emailed them and said, well, we haven't seen the plans. What's soon? Define soon, please.
Yeah.
And, the first thing I thought of is what's the access going to look like? And how's that going to impact this proposed frontage road they have? And I know there's a plan out there. But anyway, that's just a very small example of how we need to be looking in the future. So when I come in and talk about growth, it's not about what's going to happen next fire season or the fire season after. It's going to be, I'm new, but I understand your history and your history of growth, and I can't even wrap my head around the way that this area has grown. What's it going to look like in 10 years? And are we going to have a significant event because the fuel's changing, because we're having some lighter winters, because everything in the world's cyclic, right? So we're going through a cycle right now. Maybe we're going to get some lighter winters and maybe some drier, hotter summers. Canada has huge fires. They're north of us.
Well, I like that idea of development review discussion because it has us doing that conversation within our community of where we're going. And in part, what I'm hearing you say is maybe we need to be pulling fire into our development sooner than we are He just snatched that microphone and sat down.
Well, and
It's like a boss.
this is just as much my fault, maybe 51% my fault, 49% everyone else. How often do I see Jake when I have a problem, right? And so I get it. I until now, I haven't really had the bandwidth to start taking on additional things, but thanks to my fire administrator, she's doing an excellent job.
Well, and I think
She's
that's a
taken on
huge
some new
one, is
things,
to
so.
have that conversation before we have a problem, because I think that's where people have a little bit of that frustration as the conversation happens. We're in the middle of a crisis, but in some ways, what did we do to prepare for the future growth as it relates to fire? And I want to let
Well,
the
an
microphone
email,
just...
and I can cut Dave off. It's just
Oh.
no. I'm just joking.
He's-
An email.
I did not say that, so that's all.
I did. He's my boss. It's all right. Email. Just one thing, real quick. Email is really hard, right?
Yes.
I found myself through my career either getting frustrated because of an email or escalating because of an email. And so, if for whatever reason, fire and the planning division or department are not seeing eye to eye, if we sit across the table from each other, we're going to walk out of there with a solution. If we're going to fire emails back and forth, nothing's going to get accomplished.
Well, and I wonder if there's collaboration between fire, EMS, and the ambulance district as a whole to have that discussion on the state of the county and the growth, so that together we're making a plan, because each one of these departments touches something different in Bonner County. And I actually think that the idea of even planning, because they see way more of than what the commissioners see, because we're going through some files, but not all files. And so I do agree also that we can over meeting and we can over email, but I think there is a disconnect between the growth, the development, because you hear about it and then you have to adjust, versus being able to say, I understand that development is a good idea, but in terms of health, safety, and welfare, which is what the commissioners in terms of LUPA are charged with taking a look at, we have not grown in this area to support that increased density potentially. And the lack of that conversation before that decision can cause a problem, because once the board votes for that development, then we're essentially handing it back to emergency services, whether that's fire, EMS, or emergency services, I'll say ambulance district, that we're saying we've created the situation that you now must find a solution to, versus let's find a solution before we make a decision so that we can prepare before something negative happens. Can Dave speak now, or when does he get to speak?
I yield the floor.
I'm honored.
He got up and snatched
I know.
it, so,
No, I'm just saying, I'd like to go next.
okay.
I just wanted to put some emphasis on when you're talking about impact, because this comes up in planning all the time. They look at a project and its impact, and then they look at another project and its impact. And the conversation needs to go to cumulative impact. I've brought this up 100 times, that, yes, this subdivision is only going to put X number of cars on this road, but what about the one that, so it isn't just what that one does, it is what is the cumulative impact that we can project over time is likely to be. It's super important for these, and it ties into fire and EMS and everything else, and law enforcement, which hasn't been mentioned yet.
I think that's true, and I think the landscape that we're looking at is, does that discussion need to start happening of, the board has approved this, but in this area, we're anticipating this level of growth, and this is what this area can absorb or not absorb based on what our available resources are. I told you, I don't know why.
This should be happening in the approval process, or instead of calling it the approval process, let's call it the review process, which may or may not end up in approval, but part of that conversation needs to be cumulative impact before the approval.
And there's a disconnect, I think, here, because the county doesn't have its own county fire department. So you have to bring in what you might consider external resources. But if you had a county fire department, if you were in a city, Chief Gilcrease goes to city leadership meetings all the time, and they talk about developments and plans and things like that. So that's where I think we just need to build that relationship. I use, the subdivision, 150 homes outside of the city of Kootenai. And then you and I have talked about that one, and then you and I have talked about Kootenai Cutoff. Kootenai Cutoff is my prime example, because if I'm coming out of Walmart, I got to go right. If I'm coming out of Home Depot, I got to go right, and I'm going out the long way to get to my house. So that one always just sticks in my head, because what does it do? It impacts my life, my personal life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it does not impact your service as a fire chief or fire department, no. Couple of different items. Wayne Martin for the record, Bonner County. Levies. And I know levies are very important, not just for the fire service, but for schools and everything else. And my opinion is that getting the message out and trying to have town halls or community meetings to be able to let the public be aware of what the needs are and all. I know out in our area, you put a levy sign up, and I almost guarantee you it's going to be a 93, 94% no. Because there's no understanding as to what the need is. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, nothing that shows the financial needs when other money has been there in the past and there's no accountability. I agree with you on face-to-face. Our society's gotten so far away from face-to-face communicating. You know, let's send an email and all. You don't hear tone inflection. You do not see facial and or body language if you can't see the person. So definitely being able to be face-to-face. And you're able to come up with things. And I appreciate your law enforcement. Unfortunately, I don't have the time, but coming into the meetings, either YouTube or whatever, fire and EMS get responses a lot. Law enforcement, we've been here for 11 years, and there has been no increase in law enforcement, staffing and all. All three of those are very big needs. As a 72-year-old man, it's hard for me to sit there and say, hey, I'm going to volunteer and pull hose and be able to pull bodies around and all. I know my limitations. My other one is with fires and with research and stuff that I've done. Your thought on a major fire, and I'm not going to talk about a specific area, but something going on, relying on tankers to provide your water versus requiring a water supply on the property. I know equipment is getting better and better to be able to pump into tankers, to be able to get to a location. But if there's multiple fires, when Bayview had their fire, and I know Spirit Lake has had fires, and we've had other fires, your tanker availability just goes downward
So you're asking
drastically.
him to answer about, should we have?
What is your thought in that direction, and your thought as to supplementing the water supply from saying, yep, we're going to bring all the tankers in to fight a fire versus requiring a water supply of some size to assist in that, to get your fire tankers to be able to come in or whatever?
So that's a loaded question that there is no one answer to. A lot of it has to do with fuel, a lot of it has to do with location, roadways. The blanket requirement on some properties to have a cistern, regardless of what they're building, is not fair. A 2,000 gallon cistern does nothing for me if there's a major fire. What I would actually like to see us start transitioning towards is more community water sources where we have actually larger tanks, the ability for us to fill tank trucks more quickly, put into play some operations that allows us to turn around quickly. Pulling up a driveway, hooking up my water tender to a cistern and pulling that water, that's time consuming. And then what's the communication about where that cistern is? We're not tracking them in this county. It's the first thing I noticed when I got here. All these people had cisterns. Nobody's tracking who has them and who doesn't. So that's the first problem. It doesn't even talk about maintenance and cleaning and all that stuff. My guys don't even know where they're at. So I think we need to fix that. But pulling in and hooking up and filling that truck once and then heading off down the road to go supply the brush truck or whatever we're going to do, the next engine comes in, pulls in there, realizes, oh, that's dry, backs up, goes to the next one. Oh, that one's dry too, backs up, goes over this one. Oh, well, there's sticks and stones in this one. Can't hook up to that. You see what I'm saying? I'm leading to where this isn't really looked at from a 40,000 foot level. So I think we need to get to more community storage. So we've had some developments in the Sagal district since, where we've actually talked about, let's do a larger storage, let's get the community together. There's actually a community out in Sagal talking about putting up what I call snap tanks, which is a fold-up tanks, doing foldable tanks in the summer, filling them, leaving them there, and then when the weather turns, draining them and lowering them down, or fold them up, put them away. So, yeah, I'm torn on water storage. Water is going to be a problem. But I will tell you that the 2 or 3 water tenders we have and the 3 firefighters we have, 3 or 4 firefighters we have on duty in the Sagal Fire District are not stopping a major fire. We don't have the resources to stop a major fire. So if it gets to the point where it's burning like that, then it's going to be an air show, and we hope that the aircraft keeps it in check so we can get in and go direct.
When you're looking at the subdivisions and to the comment about storage of water, it sounds like that's a reason for fire to have a greater input into the development, because the part of the, the idea of let's break up land and say our 5-acre minimum, everybody has their own well, doesn't allow you that access to pull that water. But if you were developing in terms of a community with a community water source, your input, if we were at that level, could be more of a, you need to have a water source so that we could protect fire. And I think there's a benefit to us doing that because we also want insurance. And so when you can show that you have a mitigation factor like that within your reach that would lower the time and fire would know this community has a way for me to fight this fire, that's something that you can report to insurance, which is beneficial because a lot of us in Bonner County don't have the ability to obtain insurance because of where we are, our lack of fire mitigation, how far fire would take to get to us, or the reliance on air to put it in check so that you guys could drive up to it. Clerk Rosedale.
Mike Rosedale, Bonner County Clerk. Thank you, Chief Armstrong, for coming and talking to everybody. I appreciate that. So you talked about sort of a macro level, and you've talked about sort of a mid-level, talking about different regional tankers, water supply. On a very micro level, like a house, when you pull up to a house, is there something that you could see that would help you? You're like hoping to see that there. I don't know what it would be.
Defensible space.
Defensible space. I don't know, like me. You pull up to my house. If I ran out and say, Chief Armstrong, I have a fill in the blank, you'll say, oh, good. Or you'll say, so what? I mean, what would you like to see, if at all, in a way that would help you? And on that also, are there things that you think all of us should have, like those, fans on the side of a house where there's a tree, that put up a wall of water, or sprinklers or whatever? Do you have recommended stuff?
I have never seen a fan. What is a fan on the side?
It's like a polyester plastic thing you hook up with, to a fire hose, most likely, but to a garden hose, and it makes just a fan, a solid sheet of water that blocks the radiant heat a little bit. You guys know better than I do. I don't have one.
I'm going to say it again, defensible space, where I can sit there with a fire engine and our tank of water and I can save a home with defensible space. Water is needed when you get BTUs. BTUs is when there's a lot of fire, right? So if I can keep that thing in check, or I can just stand there and allow that fire front to pass that home and then go back and patrol it after the fire's gone through, that's what's going to save that home. Some other things, if you're near a water source, what we call a trash pump or a portable pump would be great. Maybe a couple lengths of hose. You might talk to the fire chief. I heard he might have some out-of-service hose. We're more than happy to work with you on something like that. If you're on a well, maybe look at what your well output is. If somebody does want to put in a water tank, and I know that some insurances want to see that, if you do, I strongly recommend you hook it up to your well and you have a float valve in there so that thing stays maintained, and then you evaluate it obviously for freezing, because freezing can cause issues with your piping. But I'm going to go back to the defensible space, and I don't want to have a program here where we ride around and we drive up people's driveways and we do the check marks and whatever else, because I get the privacy and the independence of up here, and I want to support that. But at the same time, there's a lot people can do without just cutting down trees. And I'm pointing at her because we talked about cutting down trees. I don't propose anybody cuts down trees. Let us come out and take a look at it first before you clear cut 150 feet around your home.
On that note, if there is a fire raging, would you suggest, if there are trees that you should have cut down, cut them down then, right? I mean, at least it would be low. You wouldn't have tall Roman candles. You'd have.
So you're saying that you would, in the middle of a fire, be out there with a chainsaw cutting trees
Well,
down?
there's some trees that are sort of iffy.
Maybe we could ask EMS.
So
get rid of
firefighters are not, we're not shy. When we show up to your home, we're gonna drive up driveways, and this is, I'm being very honest with the community right now. I'm gonna drive up and I'm gonna evaluate 3 homes. If one of them has a defensible space, that is the home we're going to work on. If you've got questionable, and I've got the resources, and we've done this before, park an engine, we've got 2 or 3 houses right next to each other, and they're all savable. We are not shy. We will move wood piles, we will throw lawn furniture, we will cut down trees, we will start clearing brush, but it has to be manageable. We're not gonna show up and do all this, and I don't advocate calling us out and saying, oh, there's a fire, can you come clear my property? But I will tell you that if the fire's running at us and we've got 30 seconds to make a decision, we're not gonna do that. But if we've got the time and we're planted on your home, which is primarily as the municipal fire department, is to protect the structures, and IDL's fight the fire, and it's down the hill from you, we are not shy about wrecking your yard.
Can I go to Teresa?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks for hosting this morning. I want to bring this up. I brought it up before, and this is thanks to the previous commissioners. We have a primary resident with an ADU being rented out, which could be a shed or a garage. And then we have 2 RVs, all on one legal parcel. So now we have quadrupled the density. And this is happening throughout the entire county, and it is becoming a major concern. Number one, they're spilling onto our roadways or in our forests. We just don't have the emergency services, as we all know, to accommodate this. So I think this should become a priority. The growth is, in my eyes, completely reckless. It's happening at an unsustainable pace. And I think this whole ADU thing needs to become some sort of priority in this county. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Diane Woolley?
Yeah, I was glad he touched on the cisterns, because we were required to put in a cistern, and like everyone else, not have no information on how to maintain those. And so I think that a chat maybe could be developed to just cover that, because we would love to have a cistern that the fire department could tap into, but I'm sure it's full of junk now. The other thing I wanted to touch on is a real concern with respect to planning and zoning and the ingress and egress from parcels. Anyone only need look at the Paradise Fire or the fires in California, many fires, where all it took was one horse trailer to block the way for people to get out. We only have 3 ways to escape if we were to have to evacuate our property, and we are quite forested here in the event of a fire. And 2 of those involve train tracks. So if the cause of the fire is a train, we now only have 1 way out. And so you put more housing here with the increased cars, we have a death trap. And it's a concern, and I don't feel that has been addressed in the past. And I would really like to see that as part of the planning and zoning process, is that consideration with how to evacuate parcels of property would be involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's do Wayne Martin and then Catherine.
I have a real quick comment with what
Quick comment. And then
Chief Armstrong had to say with the fires and all. Fire embers from major fires can be a problem. So the screening, what is it, 1/100th of an inch, I believe it is, to minimize embers from getting into either your attics or underneath your house.
I would have to look up the number, but yeah.
But I believe
and
that's
it's also
what
on
it
our
is.
website. If you look, there's a whole, yeah, I think I was gonna say, I think it's on it. Yeah.
all right, over here.
Chief Armstrong, I'm very concerned, no, I don't need to.
For everybody out there,
I'm very concerned about the importation of California-type bureaucracies to North Idaho. And that's what I see with these really huge levies that you want to put on the ballot. People move to North Idaho because they don't want to live in California. They don't want to live in Washington State with their excessive, huge bureaucracies. I was law enforcement in California. I know you work there, so you know what I'm talking about. But when you import that to North Idaho, those bureaucracies become a juggernaut, and you can't control them. The people that have to pay those levies can't control these bureaucracies. If you keep the fire districts small, they can have organic growth, but if you combine them into one huge fire district, it just becomes a juggernaut. So, and I have a question. So did you retire out of California before you moved here?
Mm-hmm.
No?
I was vested. I left before retirement age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this California, Washington State type bureaucracy, I think is a terrible, terrible thing. Because once you crack that door, you can't close it. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. And people think that this is a criticism of fire, but it's not. Nobody's criticizing fire at all. We know what you do. We know how important you are. But starting out with this huge bureaucrocy, I think is a
We're really short
terrible-
on time. Can I reply?
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're supposed to be done at quarter
Yeah.
till, right?
Yes.
Real quick, that's a lot loaded in there and directed right at me coming from California. And I'm fine, I'll own it. I'll stand up and do it. First of all, they're not my levies, they're community's levies. The community responded and told us what they wanted. I'm not gonna talk about them here. I'm not gonna use this to explain even the facts. If somebody asks me a direct question, I'm happy to answer the direct question, but we're not gonna talk about them. At the end of the day, no fire chief in this area has been as approachable and honest with the community about what our capabilities are. You talk about California bureaucracy. I came from California, and I can tell you exactly what I'm doing here is exact opposite of California. I could have 3 fire chiefs all making 100 grand, sitting 4 miles from each other, going to lunch every day. That's not what's happening. I'm working 12, 13, 14 hours a day to run 3 fire districts. I don't have battalion chiefs. I don't have a number 2. I don't have a training officer. I don't have a fire marshal. And what I'm doing is proposing growth that meets our service demands to the Board of Commissioners, and it was very well thought out, and it was very minuscule. And it was, we could use 2 more firefighters. The community in Northside Fire District wants their Samuels Fire Station staffed because there are no volunteers at the top of that fire district. So they're waiting 12, 13, 20 minutes for help. Sago Fire District, we can't continue on the path we're going. Fire engines are falling apart. We can't afford new fire engines, and I'm not advocating that we buy $1 million fire engine. We aren't Long Beach. But if we close the Carywood Fire Station, now your response time is 16 minutes to the end of that. So what I've done is I've sat down, and I know I already got the accusation that I'm trying to merge all these districts. That's actually would reduce our income, so I don't want to do that. But that's okay, as people make assumptions and put things on Facebook, and that's great. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to run a lean operation, and my focus is firefighters on the ground. My focus is a volunteer company that can come in, that it can augment the paid fire staff, and a very slim, lean administration. So I would encourage you, I think you had an appointment with me yesterday. I would encourage you to come in and sit down and talk to me, even though you don't live in our district, and let me explain to you what we're trying to accomplish. Let me open the books, let me show you our budget, because the last thing I'm doing is trying to build. I moved from there. I don't want to make this place there.
So for me, my takeaways on this is there's some work for the county to do. And in large part, it is to review how we have our discussions about our development and how we communicate with fire, with our EMS, and also our ambulance district and law enforcement, because all of those are emergency services, and that together, having that conversation of future development will help us have a better plan. There's a lot more to unpack because you didn't get through half of a page yet.
We have
but-
community meetings. Please follow our social media. We have coffee with the fire chief. We have prime rib with the fire chief. We have open houses. We've had very little interest. Maybe this will stir it.
And that's one of the things that we want to push is that conversation piece. So can you give your Selkirk Fire website? I know you've got cards there. but there's-
Selkirkfire.us, Facebook, Selkirk Fire, Northside Fire. All of our public events are going to go out there. We've got another event coming up at Blue Heron at Samuels. We've got a couple events going on in West Side Fire District, which are still in the planning phases, but everything will be put on our social media. So do that, or take one of my cards and email me, or if you're online, shoot an email to Asia and she'll forward it, and I'll get in
And
touch with you.
I'll post it up as well, because I think the conversation piece is huge, and doing a better job of how do we plan as a county where to go, and opening the conversation. So I appreciate you
Come
coming.
to a commissioner meeting.
And you can come to a commissioner meeting. And I think we have to have more chats and discussions about it. And maybe there needs to be a chat and discussion that's inclusive of EMS, fire, our ambulance district, and law enforcement of, is there and planning, is there a desire in our community to have a development discussion review so that we're talking about the growth in the different areas as it impacts our emergency services, so that together we're making a future plan instead of each of us making plans on our own. So I appreciate you coming.
Maybe we can do another one with Chief Lindsay where he and I are both here and we can talk
Yeah.
stuff.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you
All
very
right,
much for your
thank you, sir. All right, it is 8:50 and we will end our commissioner chat. If you're online and you're going to come to our meeting, you have to go into a different